Today's webinar is about shaping sustainable mine of the future, and really a lot of that is around, innovating. What does the mining industry look like as a sustainable industry going forward? Business today, society is really trying to drive the industry to lead those initiatives, and we are starting to take a lot of those on board with investors, society generally, and how we consume our commodities through our different products. Recently, I think it might have been Pamela shared a TED talk with me from Lucy Crane, and Lucy sort of highlighted how transforming to a low carbon technology will drive demand for raw materials. And there are a few examples there, and I'll just provide one, which I find quite mind-boggling, is the demand for copper in low carbon technologies. Products like these new technologies that we're taking on board, we're expecting to need to have 550 million tonnes of copper in the next 25 years. This is equivalent to what we've extracted over the last 5,000 years. So as we move into these new technologies that become more sustainable, and we as an industry start to produce products around that, we can see there's going to be new demands in new areas and traditional areas. We might, if we just now provide a brief of Dassault Systèmes. So Dassault Systèmes has a long history of helping companies in manufacturing, infrastructure, life sciences sector become more efficient and achieve their sustainable goals. We applied sustainable development before the term really existed. And even though it was not explicit in our purpose at the time, it was all about harmonizing or optimizing processes. In 2008, we stated our purpose of being more than just a scientific company, but we want to help companies and industries make products that help harmonize product nature and life. So we, as a 3D Experience company, have really taken to heart this process and have adopted it internally. And we are really trying to drive and support the different industries to make these changes. So at this point, I think it's probably worth introducing our panelists for today. Now, I'll start from the left and move to the right as you see the panelists on the screen. Michelle has made a significant contribution to the mining sector with a focus on innovation, strategy, technology, and digital transformation. She began a career with Rio Tinto as a blasting engineer and has held several roles in various companies, including Chief Innovation Officer at Barrick Gold. She's currently the chair of the Global Mining Guidelines Group, which contributes to developing best practice guidelines for the implementation of technology and socially enabled changes in the mining industry. Michelle's also the Dassault Systèmes GEOVIA Chief Executive Officer. Toma has been driving the industry's adoption of new digital perspective and in the entire business lifecycle, from innovation to recycling, with a vision to deliver sustainable life for the 21st century. He is responsible for helping metals and minerals, chemical, mining, and oil and gas companies to create more efficient, sustainable materials, processes, and facilities. He began his career with British Energy as a systems engineer, then specialised in consulting and project management in the energy sector. Toma is now the Vice President of Energy Materials Industry at Dassault Systèmes. Alice has recently joined us as our Chief Sustainability Officer and has over 20 years of experience on a broad systems perspective, having held full-time and advisory positions in large multinationals, non-government organisations, rating agencies and other organisations working on projects with a global impact. She was a founding Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer at AXA Group, where she helped the company rise to leading position in the global sustainability rankings. She serves as a board member of Share Action, a lecturer at École Polytechnique in France, and an advisory committee member at the Yale School of Management, the impact fund Giant Ventures. Welcome, guys. So just before we start, we might kick off with a poll to get some perspective on everyone's input here before we start to talk to the panelists. And really, we want to understand how important is sustainability to your company. So if we could all just enter in our selections of where we think your organisation or company sits, that would be great. There we go. There. How's that, Mark? Are we almost there?
Yep, poll is good. We've got a good number of responses in. If you want to close the poll, we can share it to the audience.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so that's heartening to see that, you know, the vast majority, 80%, is really driving that it's an important part of the business, and then for another percentage it's there, and that's encouraging to see that the third choice is basically a zero feedback, which is good from my perspective anyway. So given that feedback from the audience, what I might do is open the panel with the first question around what is influencing sustainability thinking. When you speak to people in the industry, what definitions of sustainability do you often hear, and what are they missing in that field? And maybe I'll go to Michelle first.
Yeah, sure. So I actually talk to a lot of people both in mining and outside mining. In fact, even today I had about 2 or 3 conversations about this sort of topic. And I think it's changed quite dramatically over the years. I think sustainability, predominantly when we were talking about it, especially within the industry, it was about safety, health, environment, and those things being quite separate conversations as well. I think, certainly maybe half a decade ago, we were talking very much about corporate social responsibility, which I think sometimes got a little bit too aligned to philanthropy. And so there wasn't the same thought around value. But I think what's starting to appear is more conversations, and I think this is the important part, around how do we actually create social value? Because sustainability is quite a complex problem. There are very few problems that mining companies can solve on their own in sustainability. That it requires mining companies, often academics, governments, communities, suppliers, consultants, etc., to all as a community come together or as an ecosystem come together and discuss and solve those problems. And I think similar with social value. And I'll give you an example. I was speaking to some people from Rio. In fact, this was last week, and the conversation we were discussing was around how automation will impact, and the potential impact of COVID speeding up automation will impact communities and jobs, especially in the communities. And that's where we started talking about the need to really think differently about how we create wealth in those communities, because jobs will change location, they'll change skill sets. They're transient anyway. Even historically, jobs have been transient. And I think this issue around long-term wealth creation is a much more important topic to the ultimate sustainability of our industry.
Thanks, Michelle. Thomas, wanting your input on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So indeed, the environmental impact and social responsibility are typically what comes first when really talking about in this industry sustainability. There's another topic which is very important and is fairly often overlooked. It's the topic of recycling. Because it's not always immediately obvious, the link between mining and recycling. But when you think a little more about it, or when you talk about concepts such as urban mining, imagining that in the near future, maybe some of the mining company will be granted a license only if they prove that they've been helping to contribute in exhausting, reusing the resources that are already available above ground. Well, it makes a lot of sense, and it makes the entire concept of circular economy extremely concrete. So this is something that applies to mining players, but also to metals and minerals companies, as well as chemical companies, because basically in the same way as for mining metals and minerals, excuse me, you will be allowed to produce plastic in the future only if you've been able to prove that you are able to help recycle all the plastic that was out there. So I think this topic of recycling is maybe not one that comes first, but is extremely linked to this industry. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Alice?
Yes, thank you. Well, not a surprise. I agree very much with what Michelle and Thomas already said. I think the social value issue and the circularity issue are huge opportunities, and I would just add maybe that this is sort of the path that other industries have gone through. So there's first a big focus on the constraints that sustainability represents, so reducing negative impacts on stakeholders. And then what we've seen in a lot of other industries is this gradual sort of embracing of the opportunities it represents in terms of new forms of business, new business models, new kinds of innovation. And I think that's maybe where we are in the mining industry today.
Okay. I've already thought of 3 or 4 questions, but I won't slow the momentum down here at the moment. How are citizens and investors, governments influencing the mining industry, and along these lines, and how do we think about prioritizing sustainability? Maybe start with you, Thomas.
Right. So indeed, that's a question with lots of answers, and let me go with a first one. You started by mentioning citizens, and citizens are actually consumers, and most of what they consume is tied one way or another to the mining industry. Okay, mining industry provide lots of precursor material to intermediate transformation industries, which themselves provide input to those industries that are producing the final goods. So overall, it means that what the consumer at the very end consumes is tied to what is mined and how this is being mined. And therefore, the way consumers' expectations are evolving since a number of years, and even more since a number of weeks, I would say, is impacting what is expected from this industry, is impacting sustainability track record expectations. And I think this is something that is not to be missed, because basically we'll rediscuss that later on today. But there are expectations around the sustainability track record of the mining industry, and somehow, well, this is tied to what is being consumed. So look at just few examples. So there is the well-known example of all the smart devices that everyone wants to use, and those contain lots of rare earth, and everyone wants to use them, but no one wants to be blamed for mining cobalt, for example, in bad conditions. So more and more there will be expectations related to origin guarantee for many of the metals or minerals that have been used in those devices. Same thing goes for the batteries of the electric vehicles that are coming. Electric vehicles have a green image. However, depending on what they are made of and how this has been sourced, it can make a huge difference. So I would say that a key point to bear in mind first and foremost is expectation from the end user and consumer, because they are those who have expectations related to the sustainability of the mining companies.
Okay. Alice, your perspective on that?
Off the mute. I think that the pressure from external stakeholders is key and essential in every industry, and what we're seeing now is sort of an alignment around that. So part of it is generational shifts. So younger citizens are very engaged on environmental and social sustainability topics, both in terms of where they want to work in the future, so it's an employer brand issue, and where they want to buy from, as Thomas mentioned. And what's interesting right now is that there's been also quite a big alignment with the financial industry as well. So large global investors have all put what they call ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance investing, as a top priority. And so you're seeing much more quote unquote pressure, or much more interest from the financial community as well. So there's sort of a perfect alignment in terms of attention to social and environmental issues, which is pushing, I think, all industries to rethink priorities. And then there's the environmental news coming out of the UN and other scientific experts showing that we are in many ways hitting certain planetary limits. So a lot of environmental issues are top of mind for more and more people, and more people are expecting governments to act as well. So this sort of cycle of pressure is moving everyone along in terms of progress on these issues.
Thank you, Alice. Michelle, your outline on this?
Yeah, look, I think it's been well covered by Alice and Thomas. The only thing I guess I would underline is, I think what we're experiencing in mining, especially right at the moment, is a lot of impact from investors. And this is, I guess, very specific to those that are listed on some of the major stock exchanges, ASX, TSX, LME, etc., or the London Stock Exchange. But, and you see, well, you have read in the news, Rio, BHP, others, CEOs spending a significant amount of time with, those investors that are very specifically trying to drive a much more sustainable industry and a sustainability agenda. And I think that trend will continue. I know that doesn't necessarily impact privately held businesses, though I think it will start to, especially as I think to Alice's point, new generations take on those family businesses. I think there's some of the generations are much more sensitive to these topics. And the interesting thing is that we used to think that it wouldn't impact state-owned enterprises, but we're seeing state-owned enterprises coming out of China and even coming out of Saudi, for example, that are again much more sensitive to these topics, and how it impacts how people even think about that country, and again I think influenced by younger generation, etc., and how they perceive some of these things. But so I wouldn't underestimate those sorts of impacts as well.
Okay. Just with the next question, it's sort of focused around COVID and how might COVID be influenced or start to influence actions and the thinking on sustainability in the short term, and what role may restarting economies by government investments, regulation or deregulation really possibly play in moving sustainability forward into industries? Alice, I might start with you.
Sure. That one, there's a sort of a lot of debate about whether it's what's happening right now with the COVID crisis and the pandemic is going to be sort of net positive for sustainability or not. And I personally think there's a lot of reason to think that it will actually push forward the sustainability agenda faster. You have seen pockets of this in certain governments, and the EU is one of the main ones leading on this, South Korea also, but basically declaring that their stimulus efforts will be completely aligned around their environmental objectives and the new economy, the new green economy, basically. So the Green Deal in the EU contains a lot of what Thomas was talking about around circularity, around traceability of materials, quality of those materials. So I'd say there's a big opportunity here for the mining industry because there is going to be such an increased focus, I think, on the source, origin, quality of materials in the future. And that's very much linked to the stimulus efforts that are going to be made in the EU and places like South Korea, and hopefully others will follow as well. So I think it's going to create opportunity. There is also the issue that's relevant for all industries, but also for mining, which is about sort of revenues for governments as well, right? So we're entering into a stage probably of a lot of budgetary restrictions due to the economic fallout from the pandemic. And so issues around transparency on payments, on taxes, financial transactions, I think all of that there will be increased scrutiny around that part of, and if you consider that part of sustainability, I think that also will shift post-pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, your perspective on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think some of the really interesting conversations that I've had with, again, specifically, I guess, in mining, are things like how do we speed up automation so that people can work from cities or work remotely from the coalface, still be effective and efficient. And, you know, I guess COVID has just displayed one of the weaknesses of having lots of people in you know, very enclosed areas together doing work. So I think, you know, what does that do then to sustainability? Why does that drive the sustainability conversation? You know, I think we've already seen, and you know, there's some wonderful photos if you want to go looking for photos of Vienna at the moment, where you know you can actually see the jellyfish in the bottom of the canals. They most probably have always been there. It's just the canal was so muddy that you couldn't see them. The dolphins have returned to places, you know, Vienna actually being an interesting one where they've returned. But, you know, even there's examples in parts of Australia. There's other examples around, you know, 40% reduction in NOx in Sydney. You know, and all of that is just that humans aren't moving so much, you know, air travel, and obviously FIFO contributes in that part to that. You know, that we're not driving into the office as much. So there are certainly really significant positive impacts by having people work more remotely, and for us to think through how do we then drive that so that people are still efficient and effective, and we get that collaborative, thoughtful approach to how we go about our work, but you know, we do it in a more remote manner. So I think that's the one. I think the other one I definitely have been picking up a lot more around local sourcing to de-risk. And some concerns, you know, from mining companies and even from just, you know, family members when you're buying all sorts of different things, whether it's hand washed through to, you know, cat parts, relying so heavily on parts that are coming from overseas or products that are coming from overseas. And then how does that drive the locally sourced agenda? And I think one of the significant trends that had already started but now accelerated through COVID is, you know, again, wanting to know the story, wanting to meet the producers, wanting to, you know, touch the chickens that make your eggs, whatever that might be. But, you know, we're seeing that now on a more industrial scale. So I think they're a couple of really interesting trends that I hope we don't reverse too much as we sort of go forward.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a good point. Thomas, your outlook on this?
I just agree with what was said, obviously. No, I mean, I'm very much in alignment. And there's a key concept that maybe we should highlight here is the fact that, you know, in every industry or every activity, there are concepts that you take into account in your strategy, and there are some that you leave on the side, which go under the name of externalities. And I think that the COVID-19 crisis has driven a number of strategic executives to rethink what is in the externalities and what do they take into account in their strategy. And therefore, what is happening these days, and it's been the case, and we've been talking with a number of customers about this already, is that some externalities are re-internalized, which results in a new equation. And basically, it means that, as Michel was highlighting, more local sourcing, which is actually more multi-sourcing, is something that is really a trend these days. Before that, the idea was generally just to rely on economies of scale and having the largest and lowest marginal cost operations. Today, there is this idea of ensuring that there will be no supply disruption to the end customers, and therefore considering maybe some more expensive, more marginally expensive assets, but that will guarantee more agility and flexibility to the operations. That means also by developing those new assets, there will be the side benefit of more new local infrastructures for the local communities. This is not to be forgotten. And for sure, again, operators will want to make sure that their efforts are recognized, and therefore it will be again making sure that they're able to positively communicate about the origin of the material they are sourcing, that it's more local, that it's been processed the right way, because again, there is optimization not only in terms of location of the operations, but also in terms of how materials are processed. But we'll come back to this. So I think, yeah, re-internalizing the externalities is a key point related to the post-COVID era.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting a few questions, and I might leave the questions just so everyone knows in the audience till the end, just so that because I'm cognizant of time. And at this point, we might just do another poll just to get some feedback from the attendees, if I can. You know, are sustainability and profitability mutually exclusive? Just getting your perspective on the audience's perspective on that, which I'd be interested to see what we sort of get from here, and what people's understanding or perception might be in this space. Just give it a couple more seconds. Got a reasonable feedback there, Mark?
We do. We have about 50% of the vote in.
So if everyone can just quickly put their perceptions in, that'd be really appreciated.
Okay, I think we can close the poll.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Mark. So not at all is about 45%, getting close to half, and then somewhat for another 40%, with a relatively smaller portion in that 16% saying very much so that they're mutually exclusive. So with that, we might move that up perception from the audience, and we might just move on to the next series of questions, which is around the pillars of sustainability for industry. And the first one is, the question that I'll pose is, are sustainability and profitability mutually exclusive? Which is essentially based on that poll. Do the concepts that act more sustainably or result in more costs and less profit? And if the panel has any particular examples, whether they're from mining or another industry, that would be great if we could share those. I'll start with you, Michelle.
Yeah. So look, I think. So let's start with the pillars of sustainability. So the pillars of sustainability, which are people, planet, profit. All three of them work hand in hand for something to be sustainable. And I think, back to my comment about CSR, I think we saw that as a very simplistic corporate philanthropy, keeping people sort of happy, rather than necessarily a sustainability concept around, well, what does this community need? What do they need to grow and drive wealth in their community? And so, many times we put hospitals in that were then unable to be staffed, and, very few medicines because the governments couldn't afford it, or schools that had very few kids because they, I can't tell you how many schools I've been to that we've built there where the library has no books because we built the school, but the government didn't have the finances to or, computer labs where they've got no power to the school, yet we have a computer lab. Anyway, so I think what I'm trying to highlight with that is these problems are systemic in nature. And I think sometimes we solve them too simplistically, in which when we do that, it impacts one of those three things. And typically it's the profitability thing. So, again, another example that's many mining companies are struggling with at the moment is conversion from diesel power to battery electric. Now, if you do just a simple conversion, so I literally take out the trucks that I have currently, I put in battery electric trucks, it will most probably cost you more to do that because of the recapitalisation, if nothing else, than what you're currently doing. Now, that said, technologies do come down in price as more and more organisations engage in them. So solar is a good example. About a decade ago, it was $75 a kilowatt hour. Now it's about 3 to 4 cents in most jurisdictions a kilowatt hour. So it's come down quite dramatically, and now very much in par with other energy sources. Obviously, there's a challenge, which is that you can only collect it during the day. But if I take the battery electric example, if you automate battery electric vehicles, however, so we're adding to that systemic challenge, then you can bring the size of those equipment down. So, even for the same movement. So you can then, have cheaper capital, cheaper operating costs. We know that automation, you have less maintenance impacts, you can demetal it. If you then change the way you plan your mine, because now you have battery electric, you don't have diesel, there are some different planning elements. Again, you can drive efficiencies, you can drive costs down. So I think, it requires a whole system redesign. So I think, these challenges are more complex than we initially think. We need to think about them as fundamental redesigns. I mean, even another aspect to that is, one of the benefits that you can get sometimes out of going to battery electric versus diesel is that the engines are more precise, so you can have more precise both movements as well as extraction techniques. You can reduce your overbreak and potentially, again, drive better sustainability because the more waste we stop moving around just by virtue of that pesky law of physics that requires you to use a minimum amount of energy to move 1 tonne a certain distance. You're better for the environment, better for profitability, better for the people that are doing those activities. So I think it's a much more systemic challenge.
Okay, Thomas, your outlook.
Right, so I will give my answer to the poll. So to me, not only they are not mutually exclusive, but it's by tying them together that companies will survive. So I think it's really a matter of survival, sustainability in operations on the ground is about being sustainable with the planet. So as you highlighted in the introduction of this webinar, Dassault Systèmes' purpose is really about harmonizing product, nature, and life, which was crafted about 10 years ago. And at the time, it sounded completely crazy, but today it's really spot on. I think it's precisely about people, planet, and profitability, maintaining this delicate equilibrium. So in the early days, our company, Dassault Systèmes, was really about helping specialists in their disciplines, providing them with the best tools in each domain. Could be simulation, could be geophysics, etc. But in the last decade, a number of our customers came to us highlighting that, well, basically we were over-specializing specialists and not helping them collaborate, and therefore this was not really helping. So this is why we pivoted, and we helped companies really start by what matters most. Again, how to help their end customers, or even the end customer of their end customer, achieve their end goal. This is really what was key, and our purpose is really to help build the thread to make it happen across all the different jobs. Okay, so in the end, this is what today helps car makers make more sustainable cars, using less energy and less materials to be manufactured, that will be able to drive themselves, that no longer need to be owned. It's the same thing for autonomous trucks in mining. So it's really about this innovation, which is not anymore about technology innovation only, but also is tied to sustainability. So this kind of revolution is not happening by just providing to each specialist the best tools. It's really more than that. It's about this thread, helping all disciplines work together. And again, not so long ago, we were helping specialists in mainly technical disciplines with our customers, but today it encompasses a much broader picture, and basically every topics related to compliance, sustainability, environmental monitoring are being taken into account and are feeding this thread that helps achieve superior environmental and business performances. So they really go hand in hand, and it is really about multidisciplinary collaboration.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Alice, you wanted to add to anything that's been said already?
Yeah, maybe just some trends that are not that are across industry on this topic. And I want to come back on something Michelle said about corporate social responsibility versus sustainability. The shift in language is actually quite meaningful. So corporate social responsibility, as Michelle said, was very much about giving, this concept of giving back. And now when people are talking about sustainability, they're talking about long-term financial sustainability. The question is basically, if you ignore environmental, social, and governance or ethics consequences of what you're doing, will your company survive over the long term? And so the question is not whether it's profitable or not profitable, it's a question of time scale and what time scale your company is playing on. So companies that are there with a long-term perspective to be around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years are seeing this as an opportunity for differentiation, because what generally happens on all sustainability topics and across all industries is you have a set of leading companies who see that expectations are changing, that people are sort of nonprofits and NGOs and citizens are asking for other ways of doing business. They see that as an opportunity to take a first mover advantage and to change the way they're operating. That then you start to see things like these industry coalitions, et cetera, that move the market, or at least the leading companies in those markets. And then this becomes regulation. And that's basically the path that almost every sustainability topic across industries has taken. And so the question is, what position do you want to be in when this does become mandatory? Because that's a cost, right? Regulatory compliance becomes a cost. So companies that are already in a better position and have gained the employer branding advantages, the consumer branding advantages up front, are probably, over the time scale we're talking about now, probably more profitable across that time scale. So the concept of sustainability now really is trying to get to that concept of long-term financial viability, as well as social and environmental, I would say, responsibility. So that's an important point. And then just to look at, come back again to what we talked about earlier, the financial markets. I'll just give you an example recently, which is that if you look at the last 12 months, venture capital investments in the circular economy, which is what Thomas and Michelle were both talking about. So this idea of closing the loop in terms of recycling materials and disconnecting resource extraction from economic growth. This concept of the circular economy has attracted investments that are 128% higher than they were at this time last year. And at the same time, traditional tech investments, which you would think is like the domain of VC, have been cut in half. So it depends on what you talk about profitability. The money in terms of capital investment and financing, at least in public markets, but also in sort of VC private equity spaces, is shifting towards these types of opportunities because they see them as financially sustainable also.
Okay, I might just direct this next question directly to Michelle. What roles do industry organisations have to play, like GMG, for example, in this space?
Yeah, look, I think they actually, it's a very important role, and I guess that's both why I'm the chair of GMG and why, was very keen for Barrick to be involved, very keen for Dassault Systèmes to be involved at the leadership level, at that strategic level. But there's also other great organisations like ICMM, for example, which, in fact, a lot of these organisations are now tying together because, ICM, for example, focuses very much on target setting and CEO buy-in, whereas GMG much more around, tangibly working with the sort of the C-suite, but through to the sort of ops managers, etc., to get guidelines and practical examples of how to implement some of these technologies and make these transitions. But I think what's so important about them is, as I said before, these problems aren't the sort of problems that any one mining company can solve on their own. They're not problems even that just mining companies can solve on their own, which is why we also tie into the ICMM, which is a members mainly, not mainly, exclusively mining companies. But in fact, organisations like GMG, we have mining companies, suppliers, consultants, governments who are very important from a changing legislation perspective, because sometimes what slows down some of these technologies is not that they're unsafe, not that we haven't done the risk assessments, but that there is a peculiarity to a piece of legislation that prevents the implementation. And so governments need to understand, universities, etc. But, one of the things I've been thinking about, again, as GMG, so we can solve problems much more holistically. When we all come together, we work collaboratively, which is, what underpins GMG, to try to solve industry problems. But one of the things we've started thinking through is how do we extend that membership even more? And GMG, because we're collaborative native, membership is anybody really who wants to join into the conversation. It's not an exclusivity type of concept, but how do we extend that to bankers who lend money for some of these projects, or investors who obviously are a different style of lending of money or contributing funds to these projects? Because there are still groups, consumers. There are still groups outside of that conversation that are just as important in creating that ecosystem that will help solve some of these problems.
Thanks, Michelle. I might direct the next question to Alice, if that's okay. What barriers does sustainability or the image in the mining industry and other industries have in attracting the next generation of skills and workers into the workforce?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one, because I think there was a TED talk mentioned by you, Ralph, in the beginning, and you have this very bright young person talking about how she's proud to be working in this industry, but that's not sort of the people don't see it as a sustainable industry. And when they think about electric cars and renewable energy, they think, oh, those are great industries. But when they think about mining, they think, oh, that's not a sustainable industry to work in. And I think the point there is an important one, which is that everything we build, be it a more sustainable model to generate energy or to enhance mobility or what have you, all of that takes materials. And so the question is just how we do it. And so I think, to be fair, it probably is a challenge, although I don't have data to show this, but I see in other industries, oil and gas and some other, some different industries, occasionally you see statistics in the press talking about sort of feedback from young graduates on these industries, and it's not an easy picture, I think. So I think the message about how can you sort of work on the image and the communication around innovations in mining that are driving this global sustainability agenda, and the role mining will play in that future economy. I think that messaging is extremely important. But again, there's a lot of awareness across all industries about what's called greenwashing. Right, so companies that are sort of talking more about how sustainable they are than actually delivering on it. So I think at this stage, it's a tricky line, because you both need to communicate the role that mining will play in the future economy, but you also need to be very careful about having the facts to back that up. So I think industry initiatives like the one Michelle was talking about can help with that. But I think it's something to be very wary about, because it's very hard to change an image. Trust is sort of hard to gain and easy to lose, as they say.
Yeah, it's like moving a big battleship, right? It's hard to turn around on a dime. I might just for Tomo, this last question, I'm just cognizant of time here. Thinking about the impact of the human aspect of sustainability, particularly, with how COVID forces new ways to work, and this may address one of the attendees' questions. How can mining help keep people employed, and how might it need to evolve to ensure people remain healthy?
No, that's an excellent one indeed. COVID has been revealing or accelerating a trend that was already here, related to automation and remote operations. So there is a concept that's been floated a few years ago, the concept of the dark plant, the plant without lighting, because there are no humans anymore, so you don't need to design it with lighting. With the mine, you could contemplate similar concept of a dark mine, pun intended, but without
our version would be no ventilation in a mine. Then you definitely know humans aren't going to go down there.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you save on HVAC, heating, ventilation, well, it's really a different concept, can help lots of savings, but then question remains, what is the social implication of that? I'm sure these topics are, fascinating for engineers, but then what for the local community? So that's a really important point, the point of wealth redistribution in the local communities. And as we've been discussing a few minutes ago, maybe that the future of mining is not only about mining below the surface, but also mining what's already up here, recycling. And it's really rethinking about what mining is going to be in the 21st century, that we can contemplate new ways of employing people, because recycling can be extremely manpower intensive, because this is very diffuse. To recapture this material, to sort this material, and to process this material, this is something where automation is maybe less obvious, These are complex logistics chains. So I think that is one of the ways to contemplate the future of mining and its positive impact in societies. It has, total mining, not only below the surface, but also what's already up here.
Yep. Thanks, Thomas. At that point, we might just move on to the next section, if we can. We've got about 9 minutes left, and we're really now looking at the role of innovation in helping to shape more sustainable mining operations, right? And I suppose the first one, again, I'll start with yourself, Thomas, is, what are some of the examples of how mining and other industries have innovated to become more sustainable?
Right. So again, working with sister industries, if I may say, we have seen a number of different paths, and I'll try to be brief. But for example, in the chemical industry or petrochemical industry, lots of investment has gone into reinventing the processes, the chemical processes, the thermodynamic processes, the thermochemical processes, to make sure that there were better efficiencies or using less hazardous materials. So basically transforming the catalyst or reinventing the processes can be something that works very well. For example, if I take the example of lithium extraction from brines in Latin America, currently the bulk of extraction is being done through evaporation. Evaporation in deserts where water is already very scarce. So a number of companies are today working on new processes which allow to leave water where it is, capturing the lithium at ambient temperature. So this is really one of the ways to go. Also in the downstream part of mining, in the metals industry, improving the sequencing of the process, typically in a steel mill, ensuring that we reduce the number of steps that let materials cool down so that we need less energy to reheat. This is again around the process, but not with catalyst this time, but just by improving the sequence of event. And God knows that this is extremely sophisticated in a steel plant. So many different approaches. And maybe a last one, basically using more scientific tools allow to at the same time reduce margins and execute operation closer to reality and basically create less overburden. So a number of different examples in different industries close to mining show that there's really room for improvement in many different directions that can be taken all in parallel. Ralph, I think we cannot hear you just now.
I can't hear you, yeah.
Sorry, I muted myself and I've caught myself out. Sorry about that. I think we might just jump to a question here that covers one or two questions, if I may. And there really is there a universal measurement of sustainability in the context of mining at the moment? And that's been raised in various forms by 3 or 4 people. And I'm just wondering, Michelle, I'll come back to you to that, if I may.
So yes and no. I mean, there are, and Alice is most probably the best person to answer this from a holistic investor's perspective. But I mean, more and more mining companies have adopted ESG metrics that are sort of gauged across, and there's a couple of different organisations that compare different companies, and so they've used a number of those metrics. I think mining companies, again, more generally have adopted some of the metrics such as, carbon reduction or, how do you say this? Value impact to community. So normally it's to do with, how many people get employment that are indirect versus direct. How does, government GDP grow, or local GDP, or forms of GDP grow within the community. So I think there's a mass of metrics. I think what's challenging, and it's challenging because this is a complex topic, is it's hard to say these are the 10 specific metrics, and I think this is one of the difficulties I have with some of the ratings agencies that try to attempt at comparing different companies, different industries. Two things. One, sometimes just a simple group of 10 or 20 metrics biased towards some businesses than others, and so is it a true reflection of fundamental sustainability improvement? And then I think the other one is that there's a lot of complexity because these are systems issues that we're sort of grappling with. And so, just because I'm improving my carbon footprint, for example, does that necessarily make me better than another organisation who might be rapidly increasing the number of people that are employed, as a per person that I directly employ into the industry? I mean, it's quite a complex thing, I think, to say how one company is going compared to another. But I'll let Alice talk, because I mean she's much more experienced in especially how investors think about these things, and they're the ones that have some of the more holistic KPIs.
Okay.
Well, that was a very good answer, Michelle, actually. Yes, there are global standards around reporting in all industries on sustainability, including the mining sector. So there are different frameworks out there that are used by investors. They do have different flavors. So some of them have, for example, collect more data on social issues than others, and some more on environmental issues. You also see investors with different preferences in those areas. So some investors are trying to create green funds. So the company might report on all of ESG, but they will only be looking at the E, for example, or only at the S. So that you have different sort of thematic funds that drive the flavor of what reporting is coming out of companies and that is actually retained. I think there is a move towards, what's happened is you had all these different reporting standards, and then you had these agencies that sort of interpreted corporate reporting and fed those ratings to investors. You are seeing a convergence in that space. So there is a global conversation around, can we have one global set of standards like we do for accounting on financial issues? Can we have a global accounting standard for ESG issues as well? And that's going to happen, I would say, within the next 10 years. There will be a global framework for what to report on in different sectors on sustainability. I'm sure that's going to happen in the same way it did for accounting. It just took many, many years for accounting also. So it will happen here. But in the meantime, there is a lot of variability, like we said. There's also the biggest variability right now is between countries, and which countries have made this mandatory reporting. So, for example, I'll give the example of France. France, since 2001, has had requirements for large corporations, and even not so large corporations now, to report on environmental, social, and governance issues in the same way they have to report on financial data. They have to report this data, but the country does not specify which reporting framework needs to be used. So they are not forcing one set of indicators. So it's more been the convergence in the financial markets that have been progressively orienting towards one set of indicators. And so what that means from a corporate perspective is that if you're listed, you probably are under pressure increasingly to have sort of a set of indicators. If you're not listed, it's a whole nother question. So, but anyway, the market is moving on reporting, and you will see more and more coherence and standardization. Yeah.
Can I just say sorry, I'm just going to quickly. For me, the issue, so that look, we need to have metrics, and we need to be clear what those metrics are so that we can measure our own performance and improve ourselves as an industry. Absolutely. And even compare ourselves to other companies and go, wow, how is that company achieving these great things? So, to do it, to compare, to learn. But I think that the fundamental issue that we have as an industry is not that we haven't done well and we haven't improved our sustainability performance, because over the 30 years that I've been part of the industry, that's absolutely been true. I think what we have, though, is a trust issue. The people don't necessarily trust what we say in terms of, we add 11 jobs per one job that we have directly, or we, do these great environmental things. So I think part of this issue is around data transparency that creates trust, and looking at the same data and being, more intimate, I think, with especially data with communities, with governments, and data in a format that people can understand. I mean, you and I can look at a graph, you and I can look at a whole series of numbers and go, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting, or that's something, because, we're scientists or mathematicians or accountants or, engineers. But, I think pictures paint 1,000 words. So we've got to think about how we describe these things to communities and governments more in a way that they can digest and understand. Sorry, that's my 2 bits.
Look, we've just ticked over the hour, so I might at this point say thank you to Alice, Michelle, and Tomo for participating and sharing their thoughts on these things. We're probably really not going to have time for any questions at this point in time. As Pamela alluded to earlier at the beginning of the webinar, we will follow up with everyone around those questions. And at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much for everyone attending, and I look forward to the next innovation webinar, and I'll say thank you very much to everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.